missing my
Huh?
hands. I have to maybe get another table. My problem, Shlomo, is that the table maybe that I use is a little bit too tall. So if I have this camera not the way it is, then it blocks the video camera. I can't hear you.
Okay, this is what it is. I just like we have the body language when you explain like everything. So you have to flip the machine. Like,
let me try something.
Okay, no, that doesn't. It's not important for today.
Or maybe he's wearing shorts.
Yesterday I didn't say anything. It was only 2 people, but today there's like 7 people online.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow. No, not good. Not good. See, blocks the camera. That's my problem. Better? Better or worse? Not better. I'm not happy. I can't.
A little bit further. Okay, much better.
Yeah, this is better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya, Pei Gimel, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're learning Daf Chav Zayin. We left off on Daf Chav Zayin, Amud Aleph, Mamash on top of the Amid. We have to eat Rechazer. We just left off that Rabbi Yochanan asserts that Rav Meir follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, his teacher. Let's chazer. In the beginning of Perek Shlishi, Malbenois, and Daf Chav Hey Amid Beis, we had the second case of the Mishnah, Chevra, and if you're coming on right now, you'll get it. Hamenamer Sodeyu. How did we explain that? That when a person who did not evenly fertilize their field, B'meila, when the tfuah grows, where you put more fertilizer, it's going to go quicker. It's going to ripen quicker. Once it's ripe, you cannot leave it in the ground. You harvested it. After you harvested those areas that were ripened earlier, the case of the Mishnah is now you have little spots, little groups, little patches of tfuah that will, after a couple of days, will now become ripe. So the question is, when you harvest these patches, that was the question. Rabbi Akiva says that peya mikol echad ve'echad. Rabbi Akiva considers every patch like a field for itself. And that was the whole klal that we learned in the beginning of the second chapter of peya, that we're not even talking about leaving more or less. You're leaving the same amount. You're leaving a 60th. Question, Narvas then, the Torah says that you have to leave peya on a field only for that field, not also for another field. So every patch is considered the field for itself. Every patch has to have its own pay. The Chachamim hold me'echad al hakoil. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan, that's where we left off, and he explains that why does Rabbi Akiva hold peya mikol echad v'echad? The logic of the Chachamim is because when you begin to harvest the field, I know that some parts were ready earlier, some parts were ready later. So what? It's one field. You began earlier, you end later. One satcha. Why would Rabbi Akiva be machalik it? So Rabbi Yochanan had gewaldige words. He says, that's how we left off on Av Chavav Amid Beis. He says that lach v'yave shnei minim. Just the guys understand something. That when tfuah is not yet ripe, it's called lach. Begashmius, it's more moist. That's when it needs the ground. When it becomes yavesh, that's when you harvest it. So since the earlier tfuah, the ones that was properly fertilized, the areas, it was yavesh. When you harvested that, the patches then were lach. Since he holds lach v'yavesh are 2 minim, and we have a klal that we learned that when you harvest 2 minim, you have a field of wheat, you have a field of barley. You have to leave from every field its own peya. It's 2 different minim, it's 2 different fields concerning peya. That was the logic. So he says, beautiful. He says, now let's go back to the end of the first chapter, or in the beginning of the second chapter, on Daf Tezayin Amid Beis, when we had another machlokes in the Mishnah. And just the chazer, hakoitzer lashachas, that was the case. You plant a field, everything is growing evenly. For some reason, you decide that a part of what's growing you want to give to your animals. That's called shachas. That's the way we're saying shachas. And when you harvest fuah for behemoths, it doesn't have to be fully ripe. They can eat it even when it's not fully ripe. And you make one strip down the field, lashachas. So now you had a big field, right? You decided to be koitzed here, lashachas, here. So now you have two sides. And over there, that mayor says, takamafsik. Koitzed lashachas is now every side has to have a payer for itself. Every side payer for itself. The Chachamim hold that no, ain't a mafsik elam kain charash. If you harvest the whole middle, and you plow it, now that you plowed it, now you created two side fields. If you didn't plow it, so the Gemara said Gavaldik that why does Rabbi hold that it's mafsik for the same logic? Because lach v'yaveh shnei minin. In other words, since when you harvested the middle, when you harvested the shachas, you got rid of it. The sides, for shachas, it was right. The other two sides were not ready yet. The very fact that you harvested something for shachas, it was right. This and this was not yet right. It's minim, it's two different minim. That in itself was mafsik the field. So Rav Meir follows a sheet of Rabbi Akiva, and that's what he holds. That's why he holds that it was. That's where we left off. And the Gemara is going to challenge it. I know that small dafim, it looks like a small daf. It's nothing but small this. The beginning is mamish. You have to mamish halt copy. We needed to chazer it and to hold it in our heads to get the whole thing. And the Gemara is going to actually say that l'chayra. Why do you have to say that? Maybe Rav Meir hakoitzer lashachas will hold. Not only like Rabbi Akiva, even like the Chachamim, and it's amazing that we're going to quote on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph the Mishnah that we're going to have today on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. The Chachamim, the Mishnah is speaking about a situation where you have an onion field, you planted onions. Now, onions, vegetables, when you pluck them, they don't have a long shelf life. They're perishables generally. But if you leave them in the ground for extra amount of time, so they dry out, the drier, the longer they last. The drier, the longer they last. There's a big about a case that a person first plucked onions that were moist to sell in the market. When you go to the market, you want things moist. Late, and you left in the ground something that you want to keep for you for storage. And in the Mishnah Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, there is no machlokes. Everyone holds that you have to give payah mikol echad ve'echad. We're going to speak it up when we learn the Gemara. The whole point will be is that Lav Dafka Rav Meir has to follow Rabbi Akiva. Rav Meir can follow everyone, which is the Mishnah and Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. That if you pluck some onions when they're moist, lashuk. Other onions you leave in the ground for it to become yavesh. Everyone says that you nois and payah mikol echad ve'echad. Now, really, we're going to have to reconcile because if indeed on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis there is no machlokes, so why is there a machlokes on Daf Chav Amud Beis? Why is there a machlokes on Daf Zayin Amud Beis? We'll speak it all out. We're going to show how every case is a little bit different. That will be the general sugya up until Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, and then we're going to learn the second halacha, which we already mentioned, the case of the onions. You pluck the onions first, the earlier ones when they're moist, lashuk. Later, you pluck them again to keep for storage. The Mishnah says, again, there's no machlokes that every phase demands its own payah. And then we're going to learn in the second case in the Mishnah, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, a gavaldika thing. And that is like this. There are times that when you plant, if we would plant, we're yeshiva bachrim. What do we know about planting? I don't think we know. What happens is sometimes is that you pack things in too dense. What happens when you pack things in too dense? When it begins to grow, it's amazing. The growth of one gets in the way of the other. If we have too much gaiva, we're not going to let each other grow. That's what happens. Everyone should grow. But people, so what do you have to do? But what you do in the field is you pluck out some of the onions when they're still skinny. You're not really plucking it because you want them. You're plucking them out to make room for the other ones to grow better. The Mishnah is going to tell us that the earlier pluckings, b'chlal, don't need payah. In other words, if I harvest, not because I want it, I'm harvesting vegetables, I want to make more room for the remaining ones. It's not chashav at all. B'chlal doesn't have to have payah. That's going to be a gavaldik klal. Without any further ado, I really hope that people have in their heads this chazara. And if you're watching it online, then if you don't have it clear, you have to go back. So we have the Mishnah Daf Chofei Amud Beis, which is our case, which is you have the uneven fertilized fields, Hamenamer Sodeyu. After you harvested the ripe, then eventually the patches now are ripe. But you have many patches. Machloikes Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. The words are Rabbi Kiva Omer Peya Mikol Echad the Echad the Chachamim Omer Me'echad Al Hakoil. We have the case on Daf Tezayin Amud Beis, right? With Koitzel Lashachas, the middle. Rav Meir Mafsik Chachamim Omerim Einoi Mafsik Elam Kein Charash. The Gemara just said that Rav Meir on Daf Tezayin Amud Beis, perfect, follows the shita of Rabbi Kiva Rabbi, as Rabbi Kiva was explained by Rabbi Yochanan, the Chiddush of Daf Chovav Amud Beis, that Lach v'Yavish Shnei Minimim. Gavaldik. I know many people here learn Smicha. Lach v'Yavish, it means something else. By Hilchas Shabbos, it's amazing. Same words. Lach v'Yavish, that in itself makes it into two minim. Everyone needing its own payah. So says the Gemara on top of the Amid, Mamash on top of the Amri Chavraya Kume Rabbi Yosi. Why do I have to say? Why must I say that Rabbi Kiva, that he follows only Rabbi Kiva? Of course, it's beautiful that you follow the sheet of your Rebbe, but it's not lav dafka connected to Rabbi Kiva. Kasha is afilu kirabanon. I have another Mishnah in which there is no machlokes, and l'chuura that Mishnah seems to imply that everyone holds lach v'yavesh are two minim. Now, by the way, that will automatically pose a question. Because if lach v'yavish are two minim, why is it that in our Mishnah we have a machlokes Rabbi Kiva and the Chacham? We'll have to explain that. But let's go. What's the other Mishnah? The Mishnah is today on Daf Chav Zayin Beis. The Tanin and Tamman we learned over there. The Ganso Amid Beis over there. And these are the words of the Mishnah. That's the first case of the Mishnah. That hamachalik bitzalim lachem lashuk. The word machlik means to smooth. And we're going to learn, I think, in the Marafulda that I forgot. We're going to learn today. The word smooth in Lashon HaKodesh, it's beautiful. Everything, almost every product, when you pick it, there is another expression. We already are familiar with grapes, with olives, different Lashonas, right? By when you empty out certain vegetables when they are planted in the ground, so you have the greens that stick up. So the ground is not smooth. So one way of wording picking onions is that you're smoothing your field. That's hamachlik. Hamachlik b'tzalim, but you didn't harvest all the onions in one go. First, you harvested the lachim, and the lach is good and bad. It's good, machaya, it's moist. Bad, it won't last that long. Lashuk, and then later at a next day, umekayim iveshim lagoiden. In other words, you reap the onions in two phases. So over there says the Mishnah, clearly the words of the Mishnah is nois and peah, elu la'atzman, ula elu la'atzman. Each one has its own peah. Now the question is why? Look in the top Marav folder. We'll learn today Marav folders. Lama Rabbi Kiva l'choira. If you look at Rabbanami, the Rabbanami sfira lohem. Lekhamon, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, right? Top of the Amud. Second line up. The B'tzolim, the Mach, Leklachim, Lashuk. First, you harvested the moist to sell in the market. Umekayim Yeveshim, and you left the Yeveshim in the ground, and you harvested them later. So the Mishnah says, Sheheim Shnei Minim, just like the Shita of Shachas of Rav Meir. V'loi Pligir Abanan Alel. Now, I have a question. Why didn't the Chachamim argue with that? Why wouldn't the Chachamim argue with it? That's the big question over here. In other words, if everyone is moida that Lach and Yavesh are two, so let's go back to the case of Daf Tazayinum Beis. What's Tazayinum Beis? That you harvested Lashachas. The Chachamim hold it's one. Why is it one? Well, and Daf Tazayinum Beis, the Shachas is the beginning of the harvest. You harvested both of these sides, which is the case of the Mishnah. Rav Meir says, here for itself, here for itself. The Chachamim said, it's one, because when you harvested it, it was all Yavesh on Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Here on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis today, the onions, the Gashmiyas, some of them were Lach. You harvested when it was Lach, and then you harvested when it was Yavesh. Yechap. So l'cho'ura, we don't have to say that Rav Meir is following only Rabbi Akiva. I get that the Chachamim will hold that since when you're harvesting it, it's all dry. I get it. But Rav Meir who said it's mafsik. Why would it be mafsik? Because lach v'yavish. Where did we get lach v'yavish? L'kula alma. Another thing, Chevra. What about Rabbi Akiva? Let's go. No, 1 second. Rabbi Akiva also. Rabbi Akiva, when you harvested, the case of our Mishnah, Chavteyom at Beis, every time you harvested, it was Yavish. Every time you harvested, it was Yavish. Why was it Yavish? Because you put fertilizer, so some areas became ready Yavish quicker. Then the later ones, Hamanamar, so they were Yavish. I'm just explaining why, even if you hold Lach v'Yavish Shnei Minim L'Kula Alma, it fits that in our Mishnah it can be a machloikas. But with Rav Meir, you can once Rav Meir's premise is Lach v'Yavish are Shnei Minim, it's not only Rabbi Akiva. By Rabbi Akiva, the Chachamim argue because it's Yavish and Yavish. That's what the Marav Fuld is trying to say. That the like Pligir Rabban allowed the Rabbi Akiva Ella b'Koitzer HaYavish. No, the Chachamim also agree Lach v'Yavish are Shnei Minim. Eloman daf Chafei Yom Beis in the case of Menamer. Why did the Chachamim hold that me'echad ala koil? Because every time you're harvesting, it's Yavish. Rabbi Akiva holds that since when you harvested the first part, the second part was lach at that time, so you're machalik it. But the concept of lach v'yavish shnei minim is l'kula alma. So why are you dafka insisting that Meir follows the Chachamim? So Amar Rabbi Yosi, which is very deep, that the pshat on the Mishnah that we are going to learn on Amud Beis, the case of machalik the onions, not lach v'yavish. It's not because of lach v'yavish. Lach v'yavish only explains is only Rabbi Akiva. Only Rabbi Akiva. There's something that divides fields even more than lach v'yavish. You know what that is? Purpose. And that's it's very deep. Purpose. Kavan, for what? For what? When I do something right now, me and you can be doing the same thing. If we are doing it for different purposes, this is no greater separation. We speak about Ashidach. Doesn't matter if you're the same or alike. It matters if you're going in the same direction. That is the ikit. Mamish. In other words, harvesting lashuk, which is the case clear. You harvested some to sell, some for you to storage. That is what's machaliket. Nothing to do with lach v'yavish. Amar Rabbi Yosi, no. Chav Zayin Amud Beis, and the reason why there's no machlokes in the Mishnah. Everyone says noisen peya elu la'atzma ve'elu la'atzman is because shuk v'goyden shnei minim, but lach v'yavish shnei minim bitmiya. No, lach v'yavish shnei minim only is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Beautiful.
So in the Mishnah yesterday doesn't go by Rabbi Yosi, right?
No. The Omer Rabbi Yosi is an Amoira. First, very clear. Mishnah is a Tanoim. Yeah. We don't know. There's no Rabbi Yosi. The first in Tazayinam basis Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, and the Chafeim basis Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, and Chav Zayin basis Tam Chachamim. Okay. And that's really great. And that's why the Mishnah that Chav Zayin base has nothing to do with our Mishnah. Because here you're harvesting it all to eat. You just harvest it at different times because you need it for it to become dry. And now let's focus on Rabbi Akiva, not shuk v'goyv and shnei minim, not purpose, when everything is for the same purpose. Rabbi Akiva holds lach v'yav shnei minim. We're going to push it to the boundary. And the Gemara is going to teach us how to learn a Mishnah. If you guys want, we can do this balpeh. Go to Daf Chafei Amud Beis. If you go to Daf Chafei Amud Beis, after the Mishnah, Hamanamida Sodeyu, after the Mishnah does that, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, the Mishnah says, Moidim Chachamim Rabbi Akiva. We still have to unpackage this. That Bizareya, if you're planting dill, Shabbos is dill, or chardal or mustard, if you plant them in a couple of places, every place has its own payah. We're going to get to that. Whenever the Mishnah quotes a machlokes, and it says, Moidim Chachamim Rabbi Akiva, if there would have been another area in which Rabbi Akiva would be moided to the Chachamim, the Mishnah would have to quote it. If you quote a machlokes, and then you want to show where they agree, that A agrees to B, if B agrees with A also, in the third case, you would have to quote it. Our Mishnah never showed where the Rabbi Akiva will be moided to the Chachamim. And that's a good insight of how to learn a Mishnah. And based on what I'm saying, says the Gemara, what happens? We're going back to the case of Chafei Amud Beis. In other words, you did not fertilize the field properly, so therefore some of it was ready earlier, but it's not pshat that the patches in middle were mamish moist. They were already b'diavad good enough. You're not going to harvest them because they were half and half. So the Gemara is wondering, what were to happen if chetz yilach v'chetz yavish? The Gemara is asking, is Rabbi Akiva moide, would he be moide that what it's considered one field? Because it's not lach v'yavish. If what separates the grain is lach v'yavish, what happens if it's not fully lach? It's already half and half. I don't care how you define, it's not the point. The Gemara says no. Yavish. If it's not yavish, it's another min. Even if it's part yavish, it's still considered another min. Because if Rabbi Akiva would have agreed with the Chachamim, that me'echad ala koil, in the case, chetz yilach v'chetz yavish, just like the Mishnah v'hataninon, that moidim Chachamim l'Rabbi Akiva, b'zirei hashevas v'chardal b'shloisha mekaymois. If Rabbi Akiva would have been moided to the Chachamim in the case of chetz yilach v'chetz yavish, the Mishnah would have said the same thing. Moidim Chachamim l'Rabbi Akiva in one scenario, and Umoidim Rabbi Akiva l'Chachamim in our scenario. The fact the Mishnah doesn't say Moidim Rabbi Akiva l'Chachamim is a raya that even when it's chetz yilach v'chetz yavish, it's called shnei minim. In other words, even a little bit of moisture makes it something different. And I want to tell you, Beruchnius, we know it that way, right? Rabbi Smith has a yeshiva. Lachluchius in Yiddishkeit is what we're looking for. We're not looking for yavish. It's amazing. Gashmius is good when it's dry, but that's the way God wants it. Beruchnius, you have to have some lachluchius. That's an expression. You're moist, you're good, you're living. That even if a person has a bissel lachluchius, he's only half lach, he's showing good. He's completely separated from the people that are dried up. People that are dry, nitchias ames. For that you have to have a special Rabbi Smith machane. But if you're achetz yalach, it's easy to chap anyone. Okay, that was very good. Now let's go weiter. Whoever came now, it's fine. There's it's the same thing.
All the same.
It's all the same.
So for them,
I'm a snagid, a chassid. It's all the same. Good. We're Yidden. We're serving the Eibishter. Yeah. Now that was if I insulted anyone, then it's a lie. I take that back. You can have lach here and lach there and yavish there. That's a fact. Okay. Now, mamish. Sheves and Chardal. The Mishnah's girsa, the girsa that we have in the Mishnah makes the next statement in the Gemara superfluous. And as the Marafulda points out, that it must be that our Gemara, when the Yerushalmi was written, they didn't have the letter Oi between Sheves and Chardal. So when you read it, the Mishnah says that everyone agrees that if you plant a few patches of Sheves and Chardal, even the Chachamim, you have to give payah from each one. We'll see what that means from each one. But without the word oi, it almost sounds like you planted Sheves and Chardal together. So the Gemara right away has to clarify, even though the Gemara didn't have the word oi, the Gemara is saying it's as if it says oi. That Keni, the meaning, the emes, the real meaning of the Mishnah is that even if you planted Sheves in itself in 3 places, or Chardal in itself in 3 places, they're also the Chachamim Amordio to Rabbi Akiva that what? That Mikol Echad B'Yachad. If you plant different patches of dill and different patches of mustard, they are not considered one big field. They're considered separate fields, and therefore you have to give it Mikol Echad B'Yachad. Why? What happens if you plant them? What happens if they all become ripe at the same time? Not number 2. What does it mean that you give it Mikol Echad B'Yachad? When you read that statement, it sounds like you give from every patch for its patch. Lav dafka. Lav dafka. So look inside that Chav Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara is going to give to guys. We had this before, but we're going to have over here 2 reasons why the Chachamim Amoidu to Rabbi Akiva, and there's going to be a huge nafkamina in the interpretation of what does it mean. You give a payah from every mustard patch. You don't know what it means. It sounds like from every patch you leave lav dafka. Shmuel Amar, I'll tell you why. Guys, this is it. In the patch itself. In the patch itself, you don't harvest the patch at the same time. In the patch itself. In the patch itself, you have a couple of stalks that are ripe, you remove them. These are spices. You have another thing, you remove them. Now we got a big problem. We already spoke about the problem yesterday. What's the problem? That we learned the Klal Amru B'Peya, right? We learned this in Perek Aleph, one of the earlier Mishnais. Klal Amru B'Peya. What is obligated to be payat? Oichel, Nishmar, Gedulav Min Haaretz. These 3 share Peya and Tumas Omaisis. The extra 2 you need to Peya is Likitosoi Ka'achas Umachansoi Likiyum. Likitosoi Ka'achas. Shmuel is saying, and by the way, Shmuel is saying a reality, that when you plant a patch of dill or of mustard, even in that patch, you don't harvest them all at the same time. So Bechlal should be exempt from pay. The answer we gave yesterday from the Tosfos Yantiv was only good on the grain, because every grain is like a whole tree. So there's a new answer needed. And look inside the Bir Hagra. He says, Gaval. Bir Hagra, I'm talking about Ksav Yad Aleph, which is on the left side, 3 lines from the top, in the middle of the first stickle. The Eila Hakshois, that Kivin She'ena Rishon Shebehem Mamtim La'achrin, that in the patch itself, they're not all at the same time. Amai Chayv B'Peya, B'chlal Shadino Chiyuv B'Peya, because Ha'ei Likitosein Ke'achas, you got it, David? So we're now on the widest line. You got the widest line all the way in the bottom of the Amid. So the Yesh Loimar Dafilo Hachem Havalikantosen Ka'achas, and he says something which is gavaldik when you hear it. Kiven Sha'af Oishim Shenes Bashlu Im Oimdim Alo Ilim Eim Seidom. When it comes to Sheves and Dill, yes, they're not ripe at the same time. Some become ripe earlier than the others, and people will pick them. What would happen if you wouldn't pick them? It wouldn't get ruined. People pick them anyways. It wouldn't get ruined. By the te'ena, the example the Mishnah gave in the beginning, that when you have a fig tree, the figs on the same tree, some figs are ripe and the other figs are not yet ripe. If you would leave the ripe ones on the tree too long, they would get ruined. That means you are obligated to harvest them separately. That's when it's exempt, says the Gro. Gavaldik. Right? Masha'enkein, abul te'enim, if you would leave them on the tree, nivsabas. So that's a good thing to know. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, and that's Shmuel. We had this before. Now, Rabbi Yasa, B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, gives you a whole different reason. He says, when Pneisha Darkam Lizor Arugas Arugas, because when it comes, that's a physical thing. When it comes to spices, people don't make huge fields out of spices. They never do that. You know, can people make little patches of grain? They could, if all the land you have is that. But the derech is to make fields. So we view a field as a field, that the Chachamim hold that even if you harvested the field here and there separately, it's one thing. He says by default, spices, dill, mustard, they are not planted as a big field. They are lechatchila planted in every patch. So every patch is viewed like a field. You are a spice seller, so you need a lot of it. Even you didn't plant it in one field. That's the way you patch. Every patch is separate. Now, there's a big difference the Maisa between Shmuel and the Shem Rabbi Yechanan, because the second opinion gives you the understanding, as we read it in the Mishnah, that when you have a dill patch or a mustard patch, from every patch you leave a 60th. From every patch you leave a 60th. According to what Shmuel is saying, it doesn't work that way. Shmuel is saying that every one is harvested separately. So hold on. That means when I go today to my field, and in the patch itself, there's only 10 stalks that are ready. The other 10 are not ready. And I remove 10. You know what Shmuel holds? From what I removed today, you have to leave payah. In the patch itself, you leave little pieces of payah.
10 different spices.
Mamish. The same spice. In other words, in the same mustard, the mustard stalks, or however they grow themselves, are not ripe at the same time. The Gemara says these words. Al date the Shmuel now says the Gemara, mafrish mikol kelach v'kelach. It can chop out that from every stalk you have its own. Every stalk is a little bit of a guzma, because what would you do? Would you pick the stalk or would you not pick the stalk? You trigger the chiyuv by picking it. So if you picked it, what exactly are you doing? It doesn't mean one stalk, guys. It means you're harvesting 3 or 4 stalks. So you leave a half a stalk. Whatever, you make the cheshbon of a 60th. And you can leave a bit more. In other words, according to Shmuel's understanding, why the Chachamim made it to Rabbi Akiva, it's not only from each patch separately. Every day when you go and you harvest today for whatever is ready right now, you have to leave from that to pay. However, al data the Rabbi Yechanan, mafresh mikol haruga maruga.
Rabbi, that's not a question for Daf Kozayin, but the payah, you actually leave it in the ground or whatever you are. What is payah?
Oh, there's lechatchila b'diyah. Lechatchila sheyaniach mixas payah, which means it's not a mitzvah of nesina. We shared, these are the words of Rab Chaim. The mitzvah is to leave it, not to harvest it. But if a person was machale satcha, that means they harvested, then they have a mitzvah saseh that can make up, which is now that you harvested, give from your harvest a 60th to the ani. Okay. Now we're moving on. Halacha base, the second Mishnah. We already quoted the first case, and then we're going to learn inside the second case. So the first case is hamachalik b'tzalim. It's the mana folder here. The mana folder says the why machlik means to smooth. He says the reason why Chazal use for plucking an onion field the expression smoothing the field, says the mana folder lefi that kishoiker halachim, when you pluck vegetables have little mohawks sticking out of the ground. Nishan amokim chalak. That's why nakat hamachalik. But it means when you harvest, when you pluck, when you pick. Hamachlik b'tzalim lachim lashuk. And as we explained, the lachim are ready earlier. So you actually harvested in 2 different phases. It can be a day apart, it can be a week apart. That doesn't matter. It's not together. You dafka want the ones that are not fully dried, because the ones that you sell on the market, which is perishable, have to be harvested earlier. Now again, you have a kasha. We just quoted the Mishnah, Klal Amru Bapeya, Umachansoy Lekiyum. So another kasha. The ones that you're selling lashuk, why do they have to have peya? So you remember when we spoke about the olives and the grapes, since olives and grapes, roiv of the people, or roiv of the olives and grapes are used for wine and oil. Wine and oil are non-perishables. So even if I'm harvesting from the grapes to eat the grapes, they're also chayiv and pay. Same thing is with the onions. I don't know if it's roiv. I don't know how you measure that roiv. But like the Rambam writes, that onions and garlic are chayiv and pay. Even though when you harvest onions the way we buy it in the supermarket, they won't last that long. Because people then would figure out how to dry them out more. That's the norm. If that's the norm, it's called batla datoi. Even if I am harvesting a couple of onions to put into my eggs in the morning, and those onions, even with the refrigerator, how long do they last? I don't know, 2 weeks. They don't last that long. It's the chayv and pay. So you harvested the lachem, because that's what people want in the market. The market is the market of fresh vegetables. Umekayim yeveshim lagoyim, which you harvested later. You have to dry them out, but the longer you leave them in the ground, the drier they get at some point, which is the purpose, and that's the ones that you're going to keep for storage.
And it's 2 different pickings?
2 different pickings. And as we learned on Amud Aleph, that even though when it comes to two different pickings, when it came to the case of the Mal Benois Lebenim, Machloikis Chachamim and Abba Kiva, Machloikis, here there's no Machloikis. Why not? Because here it's not just dry and moist. It's much more than that, which is it's for two different purposes. There's nothing that divide more. I'm doing something for one purpose, you're doing for another purpose.
Here it says they could have picked ones, but some were dry, some were yavish. Some were dry, some were.
If the person would have wanted, they're all moist at the same time. If I would have wanted to sell them all on the market, I would have harvested them all at the same time. But since I want some and some, they're for different purposes, I harvest them differently. That's the biggest divider. The biggest divider is different purpose. Gavaldi. And therefore, Lakula Alma, Loisen Pea, La'elu La'atzman, Ula'elu La'atzman. Stam Lahoyer, that the nusach of the previous Mishnaisin was Me'echad al Hakoil, or Noisen Pea, Mikol Echad V'Echad. Here, the Lashon is not Mikol Echad V'Echad, it's Elu La'atzman, Elu La'atzman.
So if they're harvested at the same time, but used for different purposes, they each.
That the Mishnah didn't say. That I don't know.
I think it does.
I don't think so. That I don't. Okay, I don't know. That's a good question. No, they're connected here. Not only separated. Elatzman is like the biggest chiluk. Not only mikol echad ve'echad elatzman. It's like.
But again, at the end of the day, does it make a difference in what the audience gets? It still gets this.
It's very good. Okay, Vlad, you're saying something that I keep on saying. I know it's amazing how many dafim will have. What are Jews occupied with? The ani is getting the same amount. Clear the whole thing of Perek Sheni and now Perek Shlishi. Sadcha, that from every field you have to give a 60th for that field. We're not speaking about quantities. The ani is getting the same thing. It's just about the mitzvah. Are you doing it right? You're doing it wrong. I love it. How great. Ashrenu. Now, one second. And now the Mishnah says it's not only a din by onions. The chein ba'apunim. Apunim is a legume, certain type of bean, which also some of them were, it's the same phenomenon. The market wanted moist ones. The storage wanted dry ones. So people would harvest them separately for different purposes. And the chein bekanim. Same thing with a vineyard. Okay. For some, I'm not a big maven. It could be even all for wine. No, it can't be all for wine. It's this nakoda. That's what it is. It's selling raisins. Let's go to this case. The dry ones you would leave longer. The ones you will make into raisins, and the other ones you harvested early. Now comes the second case of the Mishnah. We have a few minutes, and we're going to finish at least the Mishnah. Again, it's beautiful lashonis. Hameidel. In Yiddish, Hameidel is Hameidel, but Hameidel means thinning, and as we explained today with today's culture, Hameidel is thinning. But I don't know, is that a person overpacked? They planted too much. You know, if you would leave everything grow, nothing would grow good. Right. Everyone is a big yesh. What was the story? That guy came into the Tzemach Tzedek. He told the Tzemach Tzedek, he felt that everyone in the shul, he says, everyone in the shul is stepping all over me. So the Rebbe told him, who asked you to spread yourself out in the whole shul, that no matter where anyone will step, they're stepping on you. That's a Rebbe mit a chassid that the chassid can hear the emes. But if the person is a yesh, you have to remove. Things have to go. So you thinned out whatever you planted. There was like a phase one of picking only for the purpose of thinning. So that which remains should be able to grow. That's Hameidel. Hameidel. So the Mishnah is saying, it's not only, we think, if I removed a little bit today, and next week I removed again. We're not saying that give from today. No. What you removed for thinning is exempt from payah. Even if you're going to eat it. So if your purpose, it's all about purpose. If the ikar reason why you're harvested is to make room for something else, that's not the type of harvest that triggers the chiyuv of leaving payah.
That stuff that you're thinning, that's not chayiv in payah. Is it chayiv in Trumas and Maisos?
Absolutely. Once you make it into a goyim. Yes. Beautiful.
Once you make it into what?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to thin your field, put it in through the skylight. Basically, you'll figure out no payah, no maestros. And
I'll give you better. Move away from Eretz Yisrael, live in LA, and you don't have to keep the mitzvahs. So Noisen min hameshuar You only have to give from hameshur, means from the leftover when it's ready. But when you live from the meshur, you don't give it for everything. You only give it on mashashir. That's the point. Now, Bahamachlik is we're speaking now. Hamachlik ma'achas yad. So here, what happens is that if you have a field and you have on it, it's really going back to the first case, but it's almost like a third case. You're having it moist and dry. Let's go back to the first case of the onions.
This is one picking.
Yeah. Now, what happens if I remove moist? I can dry them out on my roof. So the Mishnah wants to make it clear that, as we said, different purpose makes a pirud. Mishnah wants to make it clear that if it's the same purpose, even if physically they're different, but you will use them, then they are united. That havamachlik ma'achas yad. So then the din is noisim and hameshuar al hakoil. What happens if I pick a little bit today? Onions,
Dry and wet.
I'm picking them for the same purpose. I wanna sell them all in the market. There's a market here in this city to sell dry.
Yeah.
I'm selling everything in the market. I pick a little bit of moist, and I'm picking tomorrow a little bit of dry. Not even at the same time. I'm picking them for the same purpose. So that the din is like any other field. When you finish, leave at the end a 60th for everything, because the unity of purpose trumps the division
Of the moist and
the dry.
Yeah.
Gavaldik.
Very good.
So now, when he does this, does the stuff he plucked count
Yeah.
towards pay?
Yeah, does he need
And
to?
it doesn't count toward pay, or no?
You don't leave it because you don't take from plucked. You take it from the standing. You take it from the stand.
That's the mishur.
Yeah. But
That's the mishur, what you left over.
what it was from
So
the end,
You picked a bunch of stuff. You want to sell it now. What's left is what you pay on.
like any other field, when you harvest the field, when do you leave the pay? You leave it from the last standing
No, that's
grains.
what we were talking about. Is every time you harvest, that's when you're gonna.
Lav dafka, that was a
That's only for
machlekes.
different purposes.
That's only if you have to give pnei mikol echad ve'echad. If you, according to the Chachamim, even in the daf chafei base, when you're menamer sodeyu, according to the Chachamim, you're going to leave at the end one patch for everything.
Makes sense.
Of course, it makes
This
sense.
whole idea of like leaving bits and pieces from every
It's
little
hard.
sounds nuts.
And I'll tell you more than that. How would the honey even know? No,
That's
it's
what I was thinking. I think marketing leader say,
How
put
was-
a little thing like
because
red tape.
honey
Hey,
normally
hey,
it is that at the end he knows in one edge if you have